system despise. So much happening in the world, you'd think I'd rise above it. When someone gets too pushy, I just tell them all to shove it. Look behind you, someone's cleaning. You're electric and it's raining. It's a dangerous world.
And so begins the shameless plug section of our show. As we get into editing, we're going to need stuff to edit, and so I've reached out to the family here for a couple of demonstration pieces. That's a track called Dangerous World off my brother's recently released CD of the same title, carterhoneycutt.com. Check it out. You'll love it. And appreciate him letting us use this in our show here. So as we get into editing in WaveLab, is going to go beyond what you typically think of as audio editing, which tends to be click and drag, cut, copy, paste, fade. And you can certainly do all of those things. But again, as we said in Chapter 1, the WaveLab mindset, you have to begin thinking on a little more of a production level than just an artist level. And what I mean by that is we're going to edit a lot more here, or we can edit a lot more than just the waveform itself. And but we'll get into that towards the end. Now, the first thing in any editing operation is being able to get a hold of exactly what you want, and then you can manipulate it. And the first two sets of tools here in the Edit tab are aimed at exactly that. So the first four here are selection tools and or mode tools, and then the next six are region tools. And so the default is going to be time selection, and this is our click and drag options. And we've seen in previous chapters you can take one channel or both and so forth. And of course, once you have something selected, then when you hover over it, it becomes that duplicate tool that we looked at earlier. Now, if you move over to the tool next to it, you're going to automatically change to the spectrum display down below and spectrum editor up above, and that's going to be the subject of the next chapter, so we're going to leave that for the moment. Put this back like it was. You have a pen tool, which we'll finish with here, and then a play tool. And when you select the play tool, your eyebar becomes the speaker icon wherever you hover and click. And wherever you hover and click, it's going to initiate playback. It's a jungle down there. I'd rather take your curve. Okay, and you can see it's picking up one or two channels depending on where you click. And that can be very handy for jumping in. Where was that part? I want just this particular thing. So like all the Steinberg products, you also have, when it comes to zooming around, you have the option to use the G and H key to zoom in and out, and you can hold them down and it'll scroll in and out. Of course, you can click and drag in the ruler as well. That's standard to all the Steinberg products. But if we say, for example, let's say we're zoomed in on an area here, and we've said this is the portion I want to work with, and you go, oh, wait a minute, actually, no, we need to do this to the whole track. Rather than zoom all the way out, grab everything, zoom all the way back in, you have some tools here where you can extend your selection. So, for example, if I want to grab just that track from the start until the cursor, I can click this, and it's going to highlight everything back upstream. And if you look in the upper display, you can see that all went to the lighter shade of blue. And by the same token, you could extend to the end of the file from the cursor. You can get the whole thing, etc. So my point is, once you're working with a selection area, you can use these tools to fine-tune your selection without having to leave your current display. If you want to get even more specific, you can actually come down to the bottom here where you see information about what you've selected. So if I drag across here, watch the display at the bottom here. It's going to change depending on what we have picked out. And if you click on that, it's going to open the range selection dialog. You also have the option to click here and open it. And this lets you get really granular in terms of exactly what you're picking out. You can specify a given length, you can set the direction and so forth. And then it's playback tools if you're going to loop something and so on. And you get in the bright blue here, you get some real detailed analysis of exactly what you've picked out, how long it is. And of course, you can change those units if you want to see this in terms of seconds and milliseconds or samples or whatever you have. And then once you've decided, say, again, if I want to go from the cursor to the end of the selection, when you get that all picked out and hit apply, and then it's going to do that. So in terms of getting a hold of what you want to work with, that's what everything in here is about. Then as you move down, we've got some basic clipboard functions. Obviously, if we Control C to copy, and now we have options to paste it in different ways, and then we can paste with different crossfade options. I'm not going to spend. The goal here isn't really to teach you how to do audio editing. It's to show you where all the tools and resources are within WaveLab. So on some of the basic stuff, we'll just keep moving right along here. Then you have a whole selection of cutting tools over here for deleting, cropping, smoothing, and so forth. And for the most part, they do exactly what their name implies. Nudging is down to the sample level, bumping stuff left and right. And I guess if you're doing manual phase alignment, for example, like we talked about a couple of units back, that can be a way to manipulate the selected area without having to, two hands on the mouse, bracing yourself and all that. So what I want to spend a little time on here, though, is this option for silence generator. And let's leave Dangerous World and jump over to a different animal altogether. Okay, what we have here is a piece of family history gold. This is a recording of my grandfather, who was a violinist, made, we think, somewhere between 1950 and 1956. Now, the man passed away before I was born, so I never knew him, but as it turns out, not only was he a musician, but he had a penchant for audio recording as well. So how cool is that? So we're going to use some of Russell Miller's work here to demonstrate a few more of the editing tools and capabilities in more of a real-world context. So what we have here is some terrible mic handling noise, then his introduction, and begins into the piece and a warm-up. But there are about 3 different things we want to address in terms of cleaning this up. So let's just take a listen to the first 20 seconds.
I'll begin with an arrangement of the Austrian national hymn. The melody on 2 strings is from a Chrysler arrangement. The variation is from an arrangement by Leonard. The scale-like passages in the beginning are just a warm-up.
Okay, that's enough to get us what we need for this demonstration. So there are a couple of things. There's all of that atrocious mic handling noise at the beginning that we'd like to just go away. Then between his introduction and where he begins, there's actually a dropout here in the background noise, where it drops to silence, and I don't know why that occurred, but it's in there, and in that context, it's a little jarring. We would prefer to have the background ambience. And in fact, if you listen closely there, you hear a rhythmic tick, tick, tick. I think that's the tag end of the reel-to-reel tape going around in the machine. And then right after he begins, there are 2 real pronounced clicks here. I'll take a listen. You can see one there and one right after it. Okay, so those are 3 examples of things that are fairly easy to clean up here in the audio editor. So I'm going to change our scale using the G and H key there. The first thing would be to eliminate the noise at the beginning. You can simply just select that. You could hit the delete key and cut it out entirely, but now our waveform's beginning at the beginning of the file, which is probably not desirable. You can undo that. We can use the backspace key, and that'll just take it to silence. Or with that same range selection, you can come up here and come into edit and then mute the selection, and that'll have the same effect. So now it should start with him with his introduction.
I'll begin with an arrangement of the Austrian national hymn.
Okay. Now, with this business over here, the drop to silence in the middle, I mean, you could make an editorial decision and say, well, let's just mute that entire thing. But again, especially with older recordings, if the ambience part of its charm, you want to keep that, we need to address that range of silence. And there's a cool tool built in to allow that. What I'm going to do is select that area where the sound drops to nothing. I'm going to come up and click, oddly enough, Silence Generator. And we'll notice that there's a second mode here you can fill with background noise. And the only caveat to this is you need to have a sample, a snippet of the background ambience you want to use sitting somewhere, and I've already done that. So I'm going to navigate out to the desktop, which is where it should be. There it is. Hit Open and apply that. And WaveLab will loop that as necessary, stretch across there. And let's take a listen now and see what it sounds like. Okay, so now we're down to just fixing those last couple of clicks. In terms of fixing these 2 clicks, now we're going to have a whole chapter coming up on restoration, and so I don't want to get too far down the road with this, but just to show you, there are some tools built right into the audio editor that work very well for this. The first step is to zoom in on the problem area here, and this is the bigger of the 2 clicks, right there. Pretty obvious. If you come over to the Process tab, you have a set of correction tools here. And you can choose anything from linear interpolation all the way down to waveform replacement. And The linear interpolation option is just going to connect whichever sample the region starts at, your selection region, to the sample it ends at. It's going to draw a straight line. And if you're working in a silent passage, that can work fairly well. This is ultimately just going to replace one glitch with another. But so we can say we did it. Here, take a listen. Okay, it's better. The loud pop is gone, but now it kind of drops to nothing, and it's still an audible defect. So we'll undo that. Take that same area, and a lot of the correction stuff comes down to trial and error. But if you try the waveform replacement 4 seconds or 500 milliseconds, those tend to work pretty well, and it's going to create a waveform reconstruction based on what it sees on either side of it, essentially. So if we zoom back out and try that. See how that sounds? Okay, that one worked. So what I'm going to do is just jump in and try that same trick again over here on the first click. And let's see how that sounds. There's a little bit of a artifact there because I wasn't zoomed in close enough. So try this one more time, get a little better bite on just the problem area. And hit replace, try 500 milliseconds. Okay. And let's see what we did now. Okay, considerably better. So that's those are a couple of examples of the editing that you can do here. But as I mentioned at the beginning, in Wavelab, there's a whole nother level of the editing available to you. There's another aspect of your audio waveform besides amplitude and frequency, and that's the metadata. Now, the concept of metadata is pretty straightforward. It's information about the file that's baked into the header of the audio file itself. And if we click on the metadata tab over here, we're going to see that we've gone in and added quite a bit to this recording by Grandpa Miller. Click the Edit tab itself, and that'll bring up the metadata dialog, and you'll see that there are 7 different categories across the top here. And which one you use really is determined by what format you're working in and what the application is. So for example, ID3, I think we're all familiar with the ID3 tags from working with MP3 files in iTunes. There are 2 versions. There's ID3 version 1 and version 2. Version 2 just supports pictures and more categories and things. The thing that I want to point out about the ID3 metadata is that it only attaches to an MP3 file. So if you're working as we are here with a WAV file, you fill all this stuff in. If you click off the screen and come back to it, it's going to disappear. So you need to really be in an MP3 format already, or if not, certainly your next move from here should be saving it as an MP3 file, or you'll lose it. The CART format in particular is targeted towards broadcast applications. That's a throwback to the old actual analog tape carts that they used to use. But most relevant to us, since we're working in a .wav file, is going to be the BWF, or broadcast wave format, sometimes called a broadcast wave chunk. Chunk meaning the chunk of data that's added to the audio header as it goes out the door. And so if we come over to the basics tab, we've got a whole bunch of different fields about time, date, who's here, and so forth. The universal material generator number and so forth. Here we go. There's that. You can put all sorts of different signature information in here, and then since this is a European format, was developed by the European Broadcasting Union, it's not surprising that it supports loudness information for the clip too. So if you look in here, you can see all of that stuff is stamped right on it, including the picture of this handsome devil before it goes out the door to broader applications. And another class of metadata that we need to look at is going to be the markers, and we're going to get to those in just a second. And really, when we get to the CD, the topic of CD production, especially within Wavelab, a CD project is nothing but metadata and markers. There really aren't. All it does is reference files that you're storing elsewhere. If you take the markers and the metadata away, you don't have anything. So this is a little more critical the closer you get to a CD or DVD production environment. But essentially, if we have this track cleaned up and we want to put the play marker to start track 1 right here, if you hover over the different markers, it's going to tell you down at the bottom what kind it is. So these are CD track start markers. You've got regions, you've got looping, which we'll get to in a second, then exclusion zones. So if, for example, we didn't want the CD to play that handling noise we so carefully fixed there, we could select all of it. And if you click on the bow tie looking thing here, it'll drop a marker at each end of whatever region you have selected automatically. So if we want to make this introduction track 1, just select all of it, right? And then we hit our track markers, and it'll automatically put them on there. And if we have, if this is going to be the start of track 2, for example, and let's say this isn't a terribly long piece, but you do run into this from time to time with classical music, where the audio program continues smoothly from one track to the next, or one movement to the next, and you want the CD player to track advance to the next number, even though there's no pause and there's no silence. Let's say this is the area where it transitions from the first to the second movement. You can come in and drop one of these guys in there, which is called a splice marker. And when the system comes to a splice marker, it's going to advance to the next track number, but there's no pause. So you can cover segues and things like that. So in any case, once this is all populated, you got your markers on here, you've got all your other metadata, then you're really done editing it and you're ready to send it on its way, and it'll have the appropriate information about where to start and stop, where it came from, who should get credit for it, and all that kind of stuff. So let's jump over to an entirely different form of work here and look at just a couple more tools that we have available for more of some more musical applications. Okay, just to touch on a couple of more tools available to you here, we have a drum loop and a flute, and we'll look at a couple of things we can do to edit those for more musical applications. So here's the drum loop. Pretty straightforward. With that loop selected, we come back up here to the process tab. We have the option to auto split, and this probably isn't the best example because this really isn't designed for beat slicing like you'd find in Cubase, but it's at hand, so we'll use it. And what we're going to do is first tell it what do we want to slice. We want to slice the file in the active window, and then it's going to ask where. And a better example for this would probably be if you imported an entire CD's worth of material as one long file, and all the markers came in, and you want to split that apart into different songs. You could tell it here to split at the markers, and it's going to go generate a separate file from each one of those tracks. Or if you had a long series of voiceover narration pieces or spoken word, like for an audiobook project, and the actor is pausing between each section, you can have it automatically split those and go park them wherever you want, so that they're neatly cut apart to begin editing and organizing and stuff. But what we're going to do here is tell it to split at the beats, since it's a drum loop and it's short and it fits on the screen. And normally this is defaulted to a sensitivity of 60, which doesn't work hardly at all, especially with something this compact. But we'll set that up to 100% and hit the next button. And this is where it's going to ask us, all right, what do you want to do with these after they're done? Do you want to save them as separate files? Do you want to park them in a montage? Do you want to add them back in? And then how much space do you want to leave between each one? And we'll actually, I'm going to turn off the fade in, fade out for this. We'll just put the slices 1 second apart. That's its default. And then the last thing it's going to go over here is how do you want to name it? And we'll leave it set to its defaults there and hit finish. And then you'll notice that it's created another tab over here, a new audio editor, in which it has the sliced stuff. It took the flute too. I didn't realize I had the flute highlighted. And we're just going to have its interpretation of where the beats were and all that. Like I said, for actual beat slicing, there's probably a better tool, something like Sonar or Cubase, but you get the idea. I want to show you that the process exists. And then let's jump back in here and look at the flute real quick. Here's the sound we're dealing with. Okay, if we want to take that and create a continuous loop for use in a virtual instrument, it's fairly easy to do. Again, we'll start by selecting the range that we want to work with. We'll come back over here to the Insert tab, and we'll drop in loop markers on either side of that, engage loop mode, and let's take a listen to this. Okay, it's definitely looping, but it's welcome back to 1984, right? You can just click, click, click. So back to the Process tab, then we have some other tools here under the loop group, and one is a tweaker, and one is, my favorite word in the whole program, a uniformizer. That's got to translate from something more elegant in German, I assume. But if you open the loop tweak here, This is going to let you go in and adjust your start and end points so they line up. And I don't really do a lot of looping, but obviously the goal here would be to try and get the waveform to come back as smoothly as possible. And you have tools to control how abruptly or how gently the loop is crossfading. And then when you're done with that, you hit apply. And I think that's going to put a big warble in the middle, but let's take a listen. Okay, not too bad. Still has the click at the beginning, though. Let's try the uniform tool. I'm not even going to try it twice. Apply that and see what we have now. Back in the looped region would be helpful. Okay. And that's actually not too bad. Like I say, for those of you watching who do that professionally are going to be doing the face palm, but you get the idea. You've got some tools there to very quickly slide the ends together and smooth out the overall tone, and then you can take this region and move it wherever you want to. So a very quick way to do this is just select, once you have that, the chunk that you want, you can select that, go to the render tab and tell it to render just the selected audio range, and out it goes. You could clip it there and park it in a different tab, whatever you want to do. But this is kind of a spoiler for the last chapter of this course, which is, even though this isn't really something you would often find yourself doing in WaveLab, remember that WaveLab and Cubase integrate very, very tightly, and this is actually a much easier set of looping tools than you have in Cubase. So if you're working on a Cubase project and you need this for a musical application, you can send your sound out to WaveLab, work on it almost as if it was one program, and send it right back over. And in the last chapter, we're going to look at the collaboration tools and the how to do all of that stuff. And this would be one application where you might say, hey, let's bounce over to WaveLab, set this up, and then we'll come back and keep doing what we were doing. So one other gem to leave you with here before we conclude this chapter. So there's quite a lot of capability with the markers here, and then you've got generic markers that you can drop just as reminders to bring yourself back to something. And speaking of, we come in here to about the 20-minute region. Let me go back to view for a moment. Just point out, then after you have some markers established, you can jump between them, move the cursor around using the navigation tools here. Apparently, when my grandfather was putting this stuff together, he was using the tapes that came with the Webcore Tape-O-Matic, and he left some of the original program material there. And I can't do a tutorial about audio recording without including this. And feel free to sample this and do whatever you want with it. It's just pure gold. Take a listen.
You too can easily make professional quality tape recordings with the Tape-O-Matic. The record ready light glows when it's properly set to record, and the distort light flashes at peak notes so that you can adjust recording volume to the proper level.
Okay, not only is that just great, but if you think about it, this is the original tutorial video. I mean, we've been trying to explain how to set your recording levels correctly and use your meters since 1956. So with that in mind, we'll move along to the next section.